Varadari. Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana. Jamuna Tira Anachari. Jamuna Tira Anachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajacharya Astottara Satyashri Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shaima Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're starting a new chapter entitled A Threat Against ISKCON. Srila Prabhupada has just left London and he arrived in Boston on December 21st, 1969. You'll remember that on December 15th, Srila Prabhupada held the grand opening of the Bury Place Temple in London, where he installed Radha Londonishwara. So just after that, he hadn't left for 3 months. He was there in London, and now he wanted to come and see his devotees around the world and encourage them in their preaching work. More than 100 of Prabhupada's disciples and followers are in the lobby of the international terminal of Boston's Logan Airport. Kirtanananda Swami has come from New Vrindavan with a truckload of devotees. Not only did Kirtanananda Swami came, but every single devotee who could possibly come from every temple, New York, Buffalo, everywhere, wherever there were devotees, they all came to Boston to greet Prabhupada because they hadn't seen him for so long. The devotees from New York are here with a large banner. New York ISKCON welcomes Srila Prabhupada. You'll notice the spelling of Prabhupada. They didn't quite get it right yet. Most of the devotees wear heavy coats because December is very cold, especially in Boston. It's way up north, there's so much snow. When you're out of the city, you have to wear snowshoes. They're like big badminton rackets on your feet so that your feet don't sink into the snow and then you get buried. So it's very difficult in Boston at that time of year. Heavy coats over their dhotis and saris and are chanting Hare Krishna. Some play drums and cymbals. A few babies and children are present. Waiting passengers can only watch, startled. Prabhupada's plane is late, and the devotees continue chanting often leaping into the air with outstretched arms. This is in the lobby of the airport. They haven't seen Prabhupada in a long time, and they are waiting, expecting to see him at any moment. Oblivious of the proprieties of being in public, the devotees chant emotionally, building almost to uncontrolled ecstasy. The state police step in to tell the biggest devotee, Brahmananda, they had to look for who was the leader amongst these wild people. So Brahmananda would always stand out. Cool it, that's what the police had to say. The chanting falls away to a murmur of japa. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. The plane from London arrives. The devotees are unable to see the passengers entering in the glassed-in immigration and customs area because the bottom 6 feet of the glass wall is painted black. Straining to see over the top, the devotees press forward, chanting, feverish, some almost hysterical. Suddenly they see Prabhupada's raised hand with bead bag on the other side of the wall. They can see only his raised hand and bead bag. They go wild. There was nothing like Prabhupada arriving at an airport. Wherever Prabhupada went, anytime he arrived, there would be total ecstasy at the airport. Fearlessly, with drums and kartals, the kirtan explodes again. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Advaita is tearfully smashing the kartals together and chanting. So Advaita, we'll hear a lot about him. Advaita is in charge of the ISKCON press. He runs the machines. So he was so happy to see Srila Prabhupada, he just couldn't contain himself. Brahmananda, jumping up and down, trying to glimpse into the customs room, is crying uncontrollably and yelling, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada, free of customs, suddenly appears before them. Kirtanananda Swami, reserved until now, leaps around airport chairs and runs to him. That's Kirtananda right there on the far corner. Everyone is pushing and running, trying to be where Prabhupada is. Prabhupada's saffron robes are wrinkled from the long flight, and he wears a knit sweater. He holds his white plastic attaché case in his left hand and again raises his right arm with forefinger and thumb extended from the bead bag. He smiles wonderfully, beaming to his children. Devotees cheer and cry, all glories to Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada, whenever he traveled, of course we know that when we go on an airplane, there's cabin luggage and there's check-in. So Prabhupada's major luggage would be checked in, but he always carried his little white attaché case with him. He never even let anyone carry it for him. He always had that in his hand when he traveled. And in there were many, many different things, including his important papers and things like that. Sometimes Sheilas would be there, sometimes Murtis would be there. Different things Prabhupada would carry, but only he would carry that bag. As he walks toward a saffron-covered sofa in the airport lounge, the devotees move with him in an ecstatic wave, pressing in close. He sits down. Paramananda from New Vrindavan comes forward with his infant son. the first boy born in ISKCON, and holds him forward to Prabhupada for blessings. Prabhupada is smiling, and the devotees are completely, unabashedly blissful. So by this time now, Srila Prabhupada had come back from India, 1967. Now it's the end of 1969. So Kirtanananda, he was supposed to stop in London and open a temple there, but he didn't do that. Instead, he returned to America, and he and Hayagriva together, they purchased a huge amount of land in the hilly areas of West Virginia. And they started the community which Prabhupada named New Vrindavan. And Prabhupada gave a whole plan of what he wanted them to accomplish in New Vrindavan. Specifically, cow protection, self-sufficient living, and he wanted a replica of the 7 major temples in Vrindavan. So one by one, they built temples, and they collected devotees because not everyone wanted to live in the cities for preaching. Some of them they would prefer to live in the countryside. So some devotees joined them in New Vrindavan, and one couple, Paramananda and Shamadasi, they were major figures there in New Vrindavan. Later, they went on to open the Gita Nagari farm, which till now is going on very successfully. So the first baby has now been born in ISKCON from devotee parents, and that's their little baby boy, and they brought him to the airport to place at Prabhupada's feet. Where's Hayagriva, Prabhupada asks. The question is repeated by the devotees, and big Hayagriva lurches through the crowd, grumbling and falling flat at Prabhupada's feet in obeisance. One by one, the leaders of the various ISKCON centers come forward and place garland after garland around Prabhupada. Prabhupada looks beyond the wall of devotees at the newsmen with their cameras and at the baffled, curious, and disdainful onlookers. A bystander says, I think he must be some kind of politician. So the devotees by that time were not very well known in America because Sankirtan was going on not so much in the streets. So the public, Hare Krishna had not become mainstream in America. And therefore it was quite curious to see these devotees with Srila Prabhupada at the airport. So now Prabhupada's seated in the lobby with over 100 devotees surrounding him and hundreds more of curious people watching the whole scene behind them. So Prabhupada begins speaking. The spiritual master is to be worshipped as God. But if he is thinking that he is God, then he is useless. My request is, please don't take Krishna consciousness as a sectarian religion. Prabhupada explains that Krishna consciousness is a great science, culminating in pure love of God. So this is a very important point that Srila Prabhupada was making, that Prabhupada was not just trying to establish a new religion around the world. This is the science of love of God. And that means that you can remain a Christian, remain a Muslim, remain a Jew, remain a Buddhist. Study this science of God to perfect your love of God. And therefore, later, when Krishna consciousness did become well known in America, and naturally when you become famous, you automatically get enemies. So when those enemies tried to stop the Krishna consciousness movement, other religions came forward to protect ISKCON. because they knew that according to the scriptures, Prabhupada was simply teaching love of God. So this is a very important point that Prabhupada was making. This is not a new sectarian religion. This is the science, the Vedic science of how to love God. These boys and girls have never heard of Krishna before, Prabhupada continues, but now they have taken it up so naturally because it is natural. Prabhupada says that he is an old man, yet he is sure that even if he passes away, his students will continue the Krishna consciousness movement. The potency of this movement is such that it can awaken awareness of God within anyone's heart. So we know that Lord Chaitanya, when he was inquiring from Haridas Thakur, how can the animals and the birds and the trees, how can they become Krishna conscious? And Haridas Thakur, he replied that even the insects, they can become Krishna conscious by hearing the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So therefore Prabhupada recommended the Sankirtan movement according to Lord Chaitanya's formula for the age of Kali, spreading this Sankirtan movement. After the arrival lecture at the airport, Prabhupada stood and was escorted outside, where a limousine waited to drive him through the newly fallen snow. Riding joyfully in the car with Prabhupada were Kirtanananda Swami, Brahmananda, Satsvarup, and Purushottam. So Brahmananda, of course, he was the temple president in New York, 26 2nd Avenue. Satsvarup, he was the president in Boston, where Prabhupada was arriving. And Purushottam was Prabhupada's personal servant who had accompanied him to England and stayed with him all these months. A professional chauffeur drove. Prabhupada talked of London. It was an old aristocratic city, he said, and the temple was in a very influential area near the British Museum. The location is what it is called downtown. So Prabhupada was just musing with the devotees because he had just come from London, telling them about, because we didn't have internet in those days, we had telephones, but you couldn't communicate very much on a telephone, and we had letters. So Prabhupada's servant would write letters telling the devotees about what Prabhupada was doing, and those letters would get circulated to all of the 21 temples, so all the devotees could hear about Prabhupada and his preaching activities. So now Prabhupada was telling the devotees about the London temple that he had just come from. They passed a large billboard advertising a restaurant and lounge, Continental. On seeing the billboard, Prabhupada said, "Chintamani." What is that? Oh no, Continental. The devotees looked at one another. Chintamani. Prabhupada had thought that the sign had read Chintamani, meaning the spiritual gems that make up the transcendental land of Krishna Loka. But Prabhupada himself was Chintamani, pure and innocent, coming to the cold, dirty city of Boston, yet always thinking of Krishna wherever he was. How fortunate to be with him. Satsvarup glanced at the professional chauffeur. "Drive carefully," he said. So fortunately, we know because Satsvarup Maharaj is the author of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, and Satsvarup was in the car, so he's able to give these small details that otherwise we wouldn't know about. Prabhupada spoke softly from the back seat while the devotees in front peered back, barely able to see him in the darkness, and completely awed by his friendly yet inconceivable presence. The other day, he said, I told George Harrison that if he thought his money belonged to him, that was Maya. So everyone heard about George Harrison, and therefore Prabhupada was just filling in the devotees about this exchange that he had with George Harrison. Not that Prabhupada was trying to get money from him, just explaining to George that everything belongs to Krishna. And if you think it belongs to you, that's Maya. So we have to remember that also. Whatever Krishna's given us, that belongs to Krishna. We should use it in Krishna's service. At the Sumner Tunnel, the limousine pulled up at an automatic toll booth. The driver threw a coin into the chute, and the red light turned green. So these automated, now we have them all over. We have the fast tags and things like that. But this is all very, very new fashioned to have things like this in America at that time in the 60s. And Prabhupada had never seen anything like it. Prabhupada asked if sometimes people drove through without paying, and Brahmananda replied that an alarm would go off. They moved ahead into the Sumner Tunnel, usually an eerie, nerve-wracking place, but not when riding with Prabhupada. So this Sumner Tunnel, the yellow, it's the highway that takes you from the airport into the city of Boston. So you can take the long highway route, or you can go under the water, see that, underwater through this deep tunnel very quickly to get to the city. So going underwater for such a long span of a tunnel would usually be quite nerve-wracking, but not when Prabhupada's in the car with you. I told George to give his money to Krishna, Prabhupada said. Not that he had to give it to Krishna by giving it to me necessarily, but that somehow or other he must spend all of his money for Krishna. But you are the only way to Krishna, Prabhupada said. Prabhupada laughed lightly. Yes, he admitted, at least in the West. So most of the devotees had never been to India. They only knew Srila Prabhupada. Brahmananda had been to India. Kirtananda had been to India. They had visited, but they weren't able to enter into the spiritual culture of India successfully. They went looking for gurus, but they couldn't find what they were looking for. The guru had to come to them, and that was Srila Prabhupada. So ultimately, what George Harrison did after coming in contact with Srila Prabhupada was he donated an 800,000 pound mansion to the devotees, and that's the Bhaktivedanta manor that we now have. So he heard Prabhupada, and he executed what Prabhupada advised him. This was the great privilege of being able to ride with Prabhupada, to hear him say little things or serious things, and to see his fathomless expression or his kind smiling. It was a rare opportunity. I am representing unadulterated teachings, Prabhupada continued. Krishna says in Bhagavad-Gita, surrender to me, and I say, surrender to Krishna. It is very simple. So many swamis come and present themselves as Krishna, and it is all spoiled. But I say, surrender to Krishna. I do not say anything new or adulterated. Krishna says, surrender to me, and I say, surrender to Krishna. So around this time, there were some so-called gurus, bogus gurus, who had come to America, and their family members had established them as avatars of Krishna. One of them particular, Guru Maharajji, he was supposed to be an incarnation of Krishna, and everything was going very nicely until he ran off with his secretary. And after that happened, then the family decided that he wasn't Krishna, but his brother was Krishna. So the Americans, they're not so dumb. They were seeing how these so-called gurus were coming to take advantage of the spiritual seekers in America. And Prabhupada, he was very different. He wasn't claiming to be God. He wasn't claiming to be Krishna. He was simply asking everyone to follow the Bhagavad-Gita. And Krishna says surrender to Krishna, and Prabhupada says surrender to Krishna. So that was the difference between Prabhupada and the other bogus gurus who were coming from India at the time. Prabhupada asked Brahmananda if 50,000 copies of Back to Godhead magazine were being printed. Brahmananda answered that they were. Good, Prabhupada replied. Turning his attention to Satsvarup, Prabhupada asked how the composing machine was working. And Satsvarup said that hundreds of pages were being composed each month. So, because we didn't have computers in those days, we had composing machines. And you would set up the parameters of what the size of the page would be and how many characters would be on each line. It was very complicated. It was a science in itself. You had to learn compositing. So they had bought a machine like that, and some of the ladies were taught this composing, so that as Prabhupada dictated, he would send the tape, and they would immediately start composing the books so they could be printed immediately. And as for Back to Godhead, these are some of the covers from that year, and the beautiful paintings that were being done by Govinda Dasi and Gaur Sundar. They were in Hawaii at that time. And then right there in Boston, you had Jadharani and several other of the artists that Jadharani was training. And in that way, the Back to Godhead magazines were becoming very artistically beautiful and attractive to the public. Prabhupada asked Kirtanananda Swami about New Vrindavan. New Vrindavan would improve, Prabhupada said. The only thing wrong was that it got blocked up in the winter. It got blocked up because of the snow. You couldn't, even the water would freeze. They would have to break the ice in order to take baths. So it was a very rural area in the mountains. The hills of West Virginia, where all the mines were, and why they chose that area, well, the land was inexpensive. It was also very fertile. So they had good intentions, but the problem was the winter time. And winter time could last up to 4 months, where you're just locked up there because of the snow. So Prabhupada was just giving practical observation that this is a problem you're going to have to face at New Vrindavan, these severe winters there. Each devotee in the car felt completely satisfied by his brief exchange with Prabhupada, and they rode with him intoxicated in spiritual bliss. Most of the devotees had raced ahead to the temple on Beacon Street and were waiting excitedly. The limousine pulled up, and again the devotees were unrestrained in their adoration of their spiritual master. Regally, Prabhupada walked up the walkway onto the porch steps, through the front door, and into the vestibule. That's a little area where you just enter before there's rooms on each side and there's a staircase, like a little hallway, where he gazed around at the purple walls and the pink and green doorways. Surrounded by cheers, and loving looks, he smiled. So most of the devotees went to the airport. Some of the devotees, just 4 devotees, got to drive with Prabhupada in the car. Some of the devotees stayed back. The ones that stayed back in the temple, they were able to greet Prabhupada. So they had garlands ready, they ready to welcome Prabhupada when he entered into the temple. The second floor parlor, now in America, we don't call it a ground floor, we call that the first floor. So that means in order to go to the temple, you'd have to go up 1 flight of steps. And that was called the second floor in America. The second floor parlor, now the temple room, was filled with more than 150 disciples and guests. So not only were there 100 devotees at the airport, but now there were 150 disciples, guests, waiting for Prabhupada at the temple. Some had rushed back from the airport, and some were already there. And they could see Prabhupada's form rise into view as he came up the stairs. He still carried his white attaché case in his left hand and his bead bag in his right. And although he had just come out of the winter's night, he wore no coat, only cotton robes and a sweater. He appeared radiant. Prabhupada approached the altar. He seemed to notice everything. The small Radha Krishna deities enthroned beneath a red velvet canopy, that's there on the left. The larger deities of Jagannath, Subhadra, and Balaram on a raised shelf above the picture of Lord Chaitanya and his Sankirtan party. Even the brass arti paraphernalia brightly shining on the small table near the altar. Turning to his secretary and traveling companion, Purushottam, he asked, "What do you think, Purushottam? Isn't this very nice?" Crossing the room, Prabhupada sat on the red velvet Vyasasana. So you can see here where Prabhupada's sitting there on the raised Vyasasana. He spoke, and the audience was attentive. After praising the London Center, the deity worship there, the expertly made puris for Radha and Krishna, he turned toward the altar and said, "If you clean the deity's utensils, your heart will become cleansed." By polishing the deity's paraphernalia, he said, the devotees were cleaning their spiritual master's heart also. As he spoke, focusing simply and purely on devotion to the deity, the devotees suddenly realized the importance of this aspect of their Krishna consciousness. "Who has made these clothes?" Prabhupada asked, glancing at Radha and Krishna's little flounced dresses. So these are very small deities that they had at the time. Later, Prabhupada would install larger deities. We have so many photos of that installation, but that'll come in another class. These are the very tiny deities that they were worshiping. Sharadiya, a few devotees called out. So Sharadiya had joined very early, 1967, with her brother Krishna Das in San Francisco. And by this time, she had married, and this is her husband, Vaikuntanath. Well, they're going to get married, Prabhupada's going to marry them. No, they were married already, right? They were married. Sharadiya had specifically asked Prabhupada if he could reserve Vaikuntanath for her as her husband. So this marriage was fully divinely arranged by Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada smiled. "Thank you very much." Then he threw back his head and laughed. "Is Sharadiya still fighting with her husband?" The devotees and guests laughed. while Sharadiya covered her face with her hands. "Don't fight with your husband," Prabhupada said. "He is a good boy. Anybody that comes to Krishna consciousness is good." He then asked to see the rest of the house. Yes, so Srila Prabhupada, although he was a sannyasi, he realized that in America, the boys and girls, they were accustomed to mixing. Everything was co-ed. So he realized he's going to have to get his disciples married. He held the marriages in San Francisco. Now he held marriages in Montreal. Now he's holding marriages in Boston. And he did this to help the devotees. And as he would marry each of these couples, usually he would send them out immediately to open temples. And for instance, he sent Vaikuntanath and Sharadiya later to the Caribbean, and they opened a temple there. So this was just as Prabhupada had done in London. He sent his 3 Grihastha couples to open the London Center. And what sannyasis were unable to do successfully, those Grihastha couples did. So Prabhupada once told me, he said, "Because your husband is a Vaishnava, you are very fortunate." So Prabhupada, he was getting these couples married, he was getting us all married so that we could help him with his preaching work by opening temples. And Sharadiya and Vaikuntanath were an excellent example of that by going to a completely far away, unknown place, the Caribbeans, to open the first temple there. 100 devotees, straining to see and hear Prabhupada's responses, followed him as he went downstairs. Although the crowd surrounded him, he remained relaxed and unhurried. He entered the press room, a long hall directly beneath the temple room. A large old offset press, a paper cutter, a folder, and flats of paper stock filled the room, which smelled like a print shop. Advaita, the press manager, there's Advaita in the center there, bowed down in his green khakis before Prabhupada. He rose up smiling, and Prabhupada stepped forward and embraced him, putting his arms around Advaita's head. "Very good," he said. So Advaita, he was very much loved by Prabhupada for running the press, and no one had any real experience how to do press work, but all of us who became members of the press, we had to learn all the different aspects. We had to learn how to cut the paper, how to fold the paper, we had to learn photography, we had to learn layout, everything, because there were so few devotees at the time in ISKCON. Whoever became a member of the press, we had to learn everything so that the press would keep going nonstop. And Advaita was in charge of all of that. So now the press is in Boston, and very soon the press will be moved to a larger facility in New York City when the temple was moved to Brooklyn. Standing before the printing press, Prabhupada folded his palms together and offered a prayer to his spiritual master. Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa, Shri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Advaita asked Prabhupada to give the press a transcendental name. ISKCON Press, Prabhupada said matter-of-factly, as if it had already been named. So the Bhakti-Vedanta Book Trust did not yet exist. That was in 1972, when Bhakti-Vedanta Book Trust, when the press was then moved from Boston to New York, and then everyone was moved to a beautiful facility in Los Angeles where Prabhupada established the world headquarters. And then he made the trust papers for Bhakti-Vedanta Book Trust. For now, the The printing facility was called ISKCON Press. Keep all the machines very clean, Prabhupada said, and they will last a long time. This is the heart of ISKCON. You are the heart of ISKCON, Prabhupada, a devotee said. And this is my heart, said Prabhupada. Now, any of the devotees who served at the press, they felt that they were doing very, very valuable service helping Prabhupada print his books. Because as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had requested Prabhupada, whenever you get money, print books. So Prabhupada was always meditating how these books would get printed. And now finally, all the press was set up, the offset, the folders, the cutters, everything was there. The composing machine, the typesetters, and it was happening. 50,000 Back to Godhead magazines every month. You can imagine, there were only 21 temples. You can do the calculation how much the devotees had to strive to distribute these Back to Godhead magazines and the other books that were being printed. Leaving the main press room, Prabhupada toured the other press facilities, squeezing in, ducking under, standing on tiptoe. The crowd of devotees followed him step by step. He peeked into a little cubbyhole where a devotee was composing type. The typesetters, he said, should proceed very slowly at first, and in that way, they would become expert. Turning to Advaita, he said, everyone in India who speaks Hindi has a Gita Press publication. So everyone who speaks English should have an ISKCON Press publication. Compared to most authors, Prabhupada's literary contribution was already substantial, but he wasn't just an author. His mission was to flood the world with literature glorifying Lord Krishna. Prabhupada's ISKCON was now 3 years old. 1966, it was established. June of 1966, now it was December 1969. Yet his disciples were only beginning to execute his plans for printing and distributing transcendental literature. So here we have a sample of the books that were available in 1969. The Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, that was a compilation of Prabhupada's lectures that he had given on the Chaitanya Charitamrita in New York City, and then later he continued in San Francisco. So those were compiled, typed, and made into the Teachings of Lord Chaitanya, which we're still distributing to this day. Then you had the Nectar of Devotion. Prabhupada started translating the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu when he first started the Back to Godhead magazines, 1944. And he would give little, in each 4-page Back to Godhead, he would give sections of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu translations, verse by verse. But this Nectar of Devotion was a summary study without the Sanskrit slokas. Then we had the 3 original Srimad Bhagavatam volumes that were brought from India. And we have now, in 1968, the abridged version of Bhagavad-Gita as it is that was printed by Macmillan. Behind that is a mock-up of the Krishna book. Krishna book was not yet printed, it was under print. And that book was going to get printed in Japan by Dai Nippon Press because it had many beautiful color paintings in it that devotees were making in Boston and other places. And then we had some smaller books. We had Ishopanishad, and we had Krishna, the Reservoir of Pleasure, the Back to Godhead magazines, and we had the records that were produced in London and also in New York City. So it was quite a nice display so far for only 3 years. Here's Prabhupada looking. This is the stock room. Prabhupada's looking at the teachings of Lord Chaitanya with Advaita standing next to him. Now, because so many devotees had come from all over the country, they took advantage and they had a beautiful Mahasankirtan in the Boston Commons, which is it was the biggest park in all of America, and quite ecstatic, all these devotees together. And you'll notice their special colors. By that time, everything was quite uniform. If you were a brahmachari, you would wear saffron. And if you were a grihastha, you would wear yellow. And this is the way the devotees dressed. And in fact, in many of our temples, we didn't even have our own clothes. All of the brahmacharis would get their clothes washed, and all of the brahmacharis would get their clothes washed, and then whatever we could grab, that's what we wore that day. No, we didn't have our own clothes even. That's how austere things were in those days. So, printing was an important step, the first step. Months ago, Prabhupada had written, "The press must work on continuously, and we all shall produce immense volumes of literature. If the press goes on nicely, I shall be able to give you material for publishing a book every 2 months. We have got so much material for the Krishna consciousness movement." And just prior to coming to Boston, he had written, "Sankirtan and distributing back to Godhead and our other literatures is the field work of this movement. Temple worship is secondary." So Prabhupada was setting a precedent that Sankirtan and book distribution, they are primary. And the deity worship, that is secondary. Secondary in the sense that we require it. There's the Bhagavad-Gita and there's the Pancharatrika Vidi. They go together. The Pancharatrika Vidi is meant to keep us pure, externally and internally. But our real work is Sankirtan and book distribution. In this picture, the Krishna Reservoir of Pleasure is on the press, being printed. Now ISKCON was printing 50,000 copies of Back to Godhead per month. And Prabhupada hoped to increase the sales more and more. Standing in the crowded, chilly basement, surrounded by devotees, press machines, and transcendental literature, Prabhupada described how he wanted ISKCON Press to operate. He said that after dictating a tape, he would mail it to Boston to be transcribed. The transcription, transcribe means with the dictaphone, Prabhupada would dictate a tape. And then the transcribers, they would have earphones, and they would hear what Prabhupada was saying, and they would type. The problem was that many of the devotees, they didn't know Sanskrit, and we know that Prabhupada speaks a lot in his books Sanskrit. So many times the devotees would make mistakes. So this is what Prabhupada said next. After dictating a tape, he would mail it to Boston to be transcribed. The transcription should take no more than 2 days. During the next 2 days, someone would edit the transcribed manuscript. So that would be the first edit, the English editing. Then another editor would take 2 days to edit the transcript a second time. So these editors, they would have to also hear, because the transcribers, they might make mistakes. So Prabhupada wanted 2 editors to edit the transcribed tape. Then a Sanskrit editor would add diacritical markings, and the manuscript would be ready for composing. And that was when, after the typing was done, Then that typed material would go to the compositor, and on those special composing machines, it would be laid out in page forms. So it's very technical, and the devotees had to learn all of these things in order to get Prabhupada's books printed. Prabhupada said he could produce 15 tapes, 300 manuscript pages every month. At that rate, ISKCON Press should produce a book every 2 months or 6 books in a year. Prabhupada wanted to print at least 60 books. Therefore, his press workers would have plenty to do for the next 10 years. If the devotees simply printed his books incessantly, he said, even if they had to work 24 hours a day in shifts, it would give him great delight. He was ready, if necessary, to drop all his activities except for publishing books. This was the special nectar the press devotees were hankering to hear. Printing books was Prabhupada's heart. It was the thing most dear to him. So Prabhupada, he knew he had had his warnings. He had his 2 heart attacks, and he had his brain stroke. He knew his time was limited, and he wanted to produce 60 books. And he knew that he was able to do his part of it by giving 300 manuscript pages every month to the press. But then the press would have to come up to that level and be able to print 6 books in a year. So they weren't working 24 hours around the clock at that time. And when it happened later, in around 1974, I believe, there was a backlog of all of the tapes that Prabhupada had transcribed, and they weren't getting printed quickly enough. Prabhupada had done the entire Chaitanya Charitamrita, and it wasn't printed. So that was when the devotees started doing 24 hours around the clock in order to catch up with Srila Prabhupada because of the quantity that he was translating. During Prabhupada's week in Boston, Purushottam continued as his secretary and servant, but only out of duty. His difficulties in London had increased. Doubtful and morose, he came before Prabhupada 2 days before their departure. Purushottam, I had decided to leave in London. I just felt like there were different things I wanted to do. But I felt obligated to stay with him because he needed me there. It was my job to at least get him back to the States. I felt that he needed someone to travel with him. And I just felt that I should complete that, have everything in order, so I couldn't say to myself that I had just quit when he needed me like that in a foreign country. So we remember that Purushottam had a lot of doubts about what Prabhupada was saying regarding the moon landing, because Prabhupada, according to Vedic Shastra, was able to show that the astronauts never actually landed on the moon. But Purushottam did not accept that. So his doubts became deeper, and eventually he wanted to leave Prabhupada and leave the movement because he felt that he had other things that he wanted to do. And this is a very important lesson, specifically for those who are very close to Srila Prabhupada physically. We've heard of the expression, the word in Sanskrit, maryada. So maryada means we should keep a distance from both the deity and the spiritual master, because as is said in English, familiarity breeds contempt. So this would happen occasionally with Prabhupada's servants. Because they were with Prabhupada day in and day out, they would forget the magnitude of Srila Prabhupada's preeminence as spiritual master and as a pure devotee. And they would leave Srila Prabhupada's service. So we have to be very cautious in our own devotional service to maintain the principle of Maryada, both when we're serving the deity and when we're serving the spiritual master personally in his Vapu form. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't speak against him or anything. I performed my duties, but in my attitude, I let him know I was really getting kind of distant the last few days. I didn't bow down to him. I would come in, but I just wouldn't bow down to him. He entered Prabhupada's room. He didn't bow down. He stood. He was too uncomfortable to sit because of the gravity of what he would say. Prabhupada looked up from his desk. Yes, Purushottam? Purushottam. I went in to see him. I knew I was going to leave, and it kind of made me sick to do it. Anyway, I told him I have a lot of questions about the movement, the moon, and everything. I just don't believe all of this. He was very congenial about the whole thing. He took it nicely. He said to me, if you have questions, why don't you ask me? And I said, you yourself have said that we should only ask questions to somebody we feel we can believe or trust. He looked very hurt. He knew what I was saying. I felt like I really hurt him. I didn't mean it to be so defiant, but there I was. He said, I've noticed that you haven't been well lately. You've had some problems? I said, well, I haven't been trying to hide it. I guess I was trying to prepare him for what was coming. I wanted to leave that night. So I said, I want to leave. But he said to me, you've been with me so long, and now you're so anxious to go? You can't even stay a night? He said, why don't you stay at least till my plane leaves? That was 2 days later. I said, okay, I'll do that then. I was going back to New York. Actually, I didn't have the money for the ticket, and he gave me the money. He gave me the bus fare. I really appreciated that. I could have borrowed some money from someone else, but he said, well, you take it, and you can pay me back later. And I did. I gave it back the next week. He was very gracious about the whole thing. Actually, I could see that he had a very special, loving way of looking at the world. I felt that sometimes I could see things in a loving way like he did. And I realized that I got that viewpoint from him. You know, that little loving spirit. He had that. And I kind of caught some of that from him. And that's one of the things I always remember about him. And I know that through his movement, I came to believe in God. Before I met him, I didn't believe in God. After Purushottam left, Prabhupada spoke with Bhavananda about Purushottam's doubts concerning the moon landing and his consequent doubts of Krishna consciousness. I can understand that he might not accept it because I said it, but how could he disbelieve the Vedic Shastras? So Bhavananda had come up from another temple to be with Prabhupada. Boston's weather was miserable. When the rain stopped, the snow fell. And when the snow stopped, the rain came again. Prabhupada tried taking a walk in the front yard, Bhavananda beside him with an umbrella, watching cautiously to guard him from falling on the ice. But after a week of Boston's nasty December weather, Prabhupada's cold was getting worse. He would go to Los Angeles. So now we'll stop at this section, and Prabhupada is going to travel now to Los Angeles, where sunny California, all the devotees are waiting for him. They've just gotten a new beautiful temple.